Deciding to use fleece in your guinea pig's cage is a very popular choice for most owners. Fleece is so easy to maintain and it can save you a lot of money in the long run over traditional beddings, especially if you have a large cage and especially if you make your liners yourself. So I myself have been using fleece for over 10 years, and in today's video I am going to show you step by step how to make your own liners as I make some new ones for the guinea pig's new cage. So first up are the materials, and the ones I'm about to show you might seem a bit cheap and perhaps not the best quality, but I have used liners made out of these materials and they've lasted me years and years, so you don't need to break the bank doing this. So these basic waterproof liners are made out of 3 materials. On top is the fleece, and I actually recommend going for the cheap fleece throws that you can find in homeware shops, the flat, non-fluffy kind. These have a low pile which is easy to sweep but still comfortable on our piggy's feet. The middle layer of the liner is a standard no frills basic polyester mattress protector. It could be one of those with a skirt round it or those stretchy bands that just tuck underneath the corners. Either way, it doesn't matter as we'll be cutting those parts off. And the final bottom layer is another type of mattress protector, which is the standard waterproof version. Those ones that have a layer of thin terry toweling on the other side of the waterproof material. And you'll find that all of these materials come in different sizes, the largest being a Super King for the mattresses, and you can get very large fleece throws these days, but I do have a workaround if you can't find one big enough. You'll also need a tape measure, sharp scissors, pins, a needle, sewing thread, and ideally a sewing machine. A basic one is fine, as all we'll be doing is a simple running stitch. And if you don't have a sewing machine, I would recommend trying to borrow one, but you can in theory make these liners by hand. It will just take you a long time doing all of the stitching. Okay, let's get started. And the first thing to do, ideally before ordering your materials, is to work out the length and the width of your cage at the base. So ideally, and unlike me, you'll actually have a cage to measure at this point. But if you don't and you're making your liners in advance, then you can look online to try and work out the internal dimensions of the base of your cage. And just remember, throughout all of this, it's not an exact science. You'll see when I'm making my own liner that my measurements are far from perfect, and in general, if you go a little too big or a little too small, it's not the end of the world. If you have a large cage, then you'll need to give some thought to whether you want to have more than one liner so you can wash it easier. And as a rough guide, the piggy's current cage is 200 centimeters long by 72 centimeters wide, which is about the same as a 6x2 CNC cage. And in this cage, I used one liner to cover it, which will just about fit in a standard 7 to 8 kilo washing machine. Our new cage is going to be a similar width to the old one, but much, much longer. So for now, I'm going for 75 centimeters wide and just short of 200 centimeters long with this first liner, which is the limit of the mattress protectors. It's really important that after measuring your cage dimensions, you add some on to allow for the seam allowance in your cage liner. So I recommend adding a generous 3 centimeters onto all 4 sides, so that's 6 centimeters onto each of the length and the width dimensions. Step 2 is to prepare your materials. So there's no need to pre-wash the mattress protectors, but you can go ahead and cut off any skirt or straps that they might have, like I'm doing here. Some people find that they do need to pre-wash the fleece fabric, though I haven't experienced that myself here in the UK. Basically, the fleece needs to wick water through it. So if you drip some water onto the fleece and it just sits there in little beads and doesn't soak away, you might need to wash it 1 or more times before sewing with it. If, like me, you weren't able to get any fleece fabric long enough for your liner, you can just sew 2 pieces together. So pin them together, making sure the top or fluffy sides face each other, and just sew a straight seam right the way across, so it should look something like this. Step 3 is to cut out your materials. So taking the fleece first, carefully lay it out, and I find this easiest to do on carpet. Lay it down without pulling or stretching it out of shape, and take a look at your corners. If they're curved round like mine are, you can cut a strip off each edge to give yourself more right-angled corners. And then just use your tape measure to cut your fleece to your predetermined width and length measurements, not forgetting to add that extra 6 centimeters for the seam allowance. And then repeat the same process for your mattress protectors. Again, you might find that they curve round at the corners or that the material bunches up a bit, so it can be easier if you cut off some strips from the edges first. Then you can just use your fleece as a template by carefully laying it down on top and lining it up to the edges on each of the mattress protectors to cut them out to the same size. Moving on to our next step, having cut out all 3 materials, we're going to firstly lay the fleece material down again carefully on the carpet. If it has a fluffy side, put this side facing up. Next, take your waterproof mattress protector and put the slippy waterproof side facing down onto your fleece, so the terry toweling side is facing up. And then put your normal mattress protector either way up on top, making sure you're lining up all of the edges and corners of all 3 materials as you go. We're going to pin the materials together a couple of centimeters in from the edges, so it doesn't matter if your edges don't line up perfectly. The most important thing is to not miss any of the layers when you're doing the pinning. I recommend starting out the corners and then spacing out the pins before filling in the gaps and not leaving big gaps between individual pins. And also, if you're sewing on the machine, make sure you put your pins in the right way round, unlike me, because I had to turn them all the other way round before doing the sewing. Step number 5, and you're going to take your liner to your sewing machine and sew all the way around, except for a reasonable 10 to 15 centimeter gap along one edge. Sew roughly in line with your pins so you know that you're getting all 3 layers in your stitches. And at each corner, leave the needle down and spin the material around 90 degrees before carrying on. It might take a while, but as you come to the end, don't forget to leave that gap. Step number 6, and once you're done sewing, we're going to trim down the seam allowance a little bit at the corners, just to make sure they aren't too bulky. Then, looking at that hole that you left along one edge, open it up on the fleece side like this and start turning the whole liner inside out from there. Push all of the liner through the hole. It might take a while if you were a bit stingy with it. When that's done, you can see that the liner is almost fully complete. All that's left to do now is sew up that hole. If you want, you can use a hand sewing needle and a slip stitch to make it look invisible, but personally, I just try to tuck the edges in neatly, pin along the hole, and then sew it on the machine very close to the edge. It's much quicker than hand sewing, and I think it still looks neat. With that, everything is finished and your liner is ready to use. And in case you're wondering, I also use these materials and this same method scaled down to make the waterproof pads for my cage. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, everyone, and do let me know if you intend on making your own liners. Homemade liners are one of the great ways you can save money on looking after your piggies. And there are several other money saving hacks which I covered in my last video, so I'll pop that up here for you to watch next. As always, thank you so much for watching, everyone, and we'll see you very soon. Bye bye!